Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Core Motive, and this is the new facelifted Ford Puma. So then, the facelifted Ford Puma. Now, the Ford Puma, as I said, came along in 2019, and it was Ford's smallest crossover SUV, sitting above the Fiesta and targeted specifically at European customers. Now that Ford has discontinued the Fiesta in Europe, this is their entry-level model. It's the smallest and cheapest Ford you can buy in Europe right now. And by some type of strange coincidence, Ford has now also left us Europeans with only crossovers, bar the Focus and the Mustang, and vans. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, but that's a topic for a different time. Let's talk about the Puma's styling. The facelift on the outside is not that extensive. There are some major and key differences between this and the previous Puma that came out in 2019. The headlights, for example, have been slightly restyled, and there's a new grille with a new pattern, and finally, the Ford badge has been moved inside the grille instead of the previous position, which was above the grille. I never really was a fan of that particular Ford design, but now I'm glad that the Ford badge is in the middle. And as you can see, it's also the new Ford badge, which loses the silver and gains some darker blue in the background. It's still a blue oval, only a little bit darker. This Puma, incidentally, is the ST line, which means it has a more aggressive front bumper, as you can see by the intakes down there, and a larger grille opening in the bottom. And it's also finished in this wonderful and free cactus gray exterior color. There are a couple of other colors to choose from, a blue, a red, and some other more miscellaneous ones, but in my opinion, this is the one you want. Down the side, other than the Puma graphic that the dealer installed, there's not much new to see. There's the ST line badge on the front fender and these ST line specific 17-inch alloy wheels. If you opt for the ST line X, you get 18-inch wheels, which in my opinion look far, far better, but this is what we have today. Also, one rather bizarre thing is that in the turn signal in the mirror is a filament bulb instead of an LED. I'm not really sure why that is, because everyone has moved to LED turn signals in the mirrors, but okay. Finally, the rear end, where we have slightly revised taillights, the new Ford badge again, a more aggressive rear bumper with a colored diffuser, and there's a more aggressive side skirts down the side as well that I forgot to mention, and the Puma badge, which is finished in black. And I believe that's tied to the fact that this car is an ST line. In the titanium, which is the base model, I believe that badge is actually silver. So what do I think of the Puma's design? Even though I'm not the biggest fan of crossover SUVs, I like the Puma's design, and I like especially its sort of plump overall look. It's kind of squat, and I love the fact that it has a wheel at each corner and the overhangs are very short, which again contributes to that whole plump aesthetic, and that's also evident in the front, where we have some pretty flared fenders and the headlights being mounted vertically on the front. It's a pretty cool and trendy design, and again, this paint color does wonders for the design. Not the biggest fan of the wheels, but the 18-inch items on the ST Line X, which is more expensive, are way better. So now that we've covered the design of the Puma, let's start, as we normally do, with the cargo area. First of all, as per usual, the key fob. Thank you. It's tiny. I'm not really used to seeing key fobs this small. Usually the ones I deal with are massive items, but this is really small. Fits in a pocket perfectly. Anyway, on the back you have your unlock button here. The lock button is right below that, and then you have the trunk release, which you have to press twice to release the trunk. And when you do that, you'll see that this Puma has the automatic tailgate release, which is a great feature to have. Not used to seeing it on BSUVs like this, but still great that it includes it. Once you're back here, you'll see that the Puma has a class-leading 456-liter cargo area. That is impressive, and it gets even better because when you fold down the rear seats, which are split 60-40, as you can see, you get 1,216 liters. One of the major reasons why you get so much cargo room in here is this adjustable floor. If I lift it up, you'll see a massive storage area in the bottom. That's a little shopping bag that I brought with me just to show you. You can, of course, move the cargo floor lower down to increase the room vertically, but you do have to keep the cargo floor in this position if you don't want to have a massive lip when you fold down the rear seats. And I'm also Not a huge fan of the fact that there's no release in here. You have to do that. But in fairness, the car is not too big, so you can just lean over and fold the seats down. Elsewhere, the cargo area includes these handy hooks to hang your grocery bags or what have you, and a 12-volt outlet if you want to plug in a fridge or something similar to that, and tethering points on either side. And something that I never talk about, but I realize that I should, is this lip is not very tall if you have the cargo floor in this position. So lifting things out shouldn't be too much of a hassle. Once you're done with your cargo area, you also have this very cleverly designed cargo cover that attaches to the tailgate, so you don't have to mess around with that too much. But anyway, once you're done with your cargo area, you press this button, and the cargo area closes automatically, like so. What about... son of a bitch. What about space in the... What about the space in the back seats? Well, let's have a look. Oh, I didn't miss the door handle. Go me. So according to the passengers I was transporting, ignore my coat, there's plenty of room in these back seats and they're very comfortable. So let's go ahead and see if that's the case. Ow! I hit my head on the roof. Yeah, actually, not bad at all. This seat is in my driving position, 5'11.5", Discord moderator in width, and there's a solid amount of legroom here. I'm not the shortest person in the world, but still, there's no problem. The headrest is bumping into my back right now because it hasn't been raised, but absolutely no problem traveling back here, even if it is a longer journey. Well done to Ford. And if I sit up, okay, headroom is on the lesser side of things, but that's because the roof lining is a little bit sloped. Also, it's kind of dark in here. These windows are pretty heavily tinted. This one doesn't have a sunroof, and it's a little dark. I can't really complain about this too much. This is Ford's cheapest car, and you can kind of tell maybe a bit more than you should. We'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, let me open the door because my camera is going to throw up a lot of noise. You have little pockets in the seats here to store, you know, whatever you might want to store in there, actually. And in the back also, here you have, thank you, autofocus, two USB-C ports. I'm not going to point at them because it confuses the autofocus. And you also have another 12-volt outlet in case these USB ports are somehow not enough. Or you can plug in some type of item like a vacuum or whatever you might want to do. Also, as you can see, the floor here is, there is a tiny hump, but it's nothing crazy. So if I just move across to the middle seat, perfectly doable. Now, admittedly, this seat is slid a little further back than mine, so less knee room on that one, but the foot space is pretty good, and there's no problem for me to sit here if I so choose. However, the passengers beside me will be a little bit robbed of space. However, if you have to take the middle seat in the Puma, it's really not so bad. And now we move to the front, but before we get in, I want to show you the keyless entry system because it has a very interesting extra feature. So, as you can see, fairly standard procedure. There's these little ridges here on the door handle. The car's unlocked right now. If I push them down, the mirrors fold in and the doors lock. And then when you want to get in, you just grab the door handle and the door opens up. But interestingly, if you don't want to press these ridges here, if it's more natural to you to just grab the door handle to lock the door as well, there's a second set of ridges on the bottom. So in theory, you just grab the door handle like this and then go like this. There we go. Very clever idea. I don't know that I've ever seen this before, so good job on Ford for that one. So this Puma has these cloth seats with red stitching. These are specific to the ST line. You also get this stitched leather on the door panel and on the dashboard here. And you get this red stitching on the steering wheel. We'll talk about this in more detail in just a moment. Also, you might notice that this is where a lot of the facelifting actually occurred with the Puma, because this interior is completely different to the previous pre-facelift model and the Fiesta and just about everything else in Ford's lineup. It's 100% different. And now we're inside the Puma, so let's go ahead and begin the way we usually do. Starting procedure is about what you'd expect. Foot on the brake, there's the starter button, just press it, and boom. And yes, it makes that sound. This is a Ford after all. First thing that greets you when you enter the Puma is the new two-spoke steering wheel. And honestly, now that I'm looking at it through the viewfinder, this square design kind of reminds me of the Ford GT, and that's not a bad thing at all. But it is a little too big for my liking. I would much prefer it be smaller vertically and be able to go a little bit higher, because right now it's a bit too low for my liking. But clearly Ford agrees with me, because look at the steering wheel on the new Expedition. Anyway, fairly standard stuff. The leather on the steering wheel is not the softest, but also not the hardest. It's pretty nice to hold. You got some perforations here, the red stitching that you already saw. On your left spoke, you have cruise control, volume up and down, voice commands. And on the right spoke, you have these controls for the the gauge cluster screen, excuse me, and your end and answer call button. Previous track, next track. And in the middle, and for some reason, there's piano black going around here. There's no need to have that, especially around the controls, but at least the controls themselves are not piano black. And in the middle, you have the horn, which sounds like this. No matter which trim level of Puma you go for, at least in Macedonia, you get a choice of two transmissions. Either a 6-speed manual or this one's 7-speed power shift dual clutch automatic, which has a sport mode and a classic mechanical. Shut up. Oh, it did the thing. It's playing the older Ford chime. No way. All right, I'll close the door so you stop complaining. All right. As I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by Ford's old chime, choice between a 6-speed manual transmission or the 7-speed power shift dual clutch automatic, which you control through a classic mechanical shifter. No learning curve here. You just press the release on the back and you go down to whichever gear you want to select. There's also like an interesting thing with the release on the back, because for example, if you're in reverse and you want to go back to drive, the shifter assumes that you're parking, so you can just go down to drive without pressing the release. But then if you want to go into sport mode, you have to press the release, but then you can go back to drive without pressing it. I know that's confusing, but eventually you get used to it. The gear pattern here does not illuminate. You only have the gauge cluster for that, as you see here. Not the best sort of integration, if you ask me, but it gets the job done. And if you put the car into reverse, you get the optional 360-degree camera system appear here on the infotainment screen. I always enjoy seeing stuff like this in smaller cars, and these cameras are very high res, and they look like I've been color correcting them in Final Cut. But they're very high res, and the way the views are stitched in this part of the cameras, like the way the views are all pasted together, is so far my favorite that I've seen in any car. So good on Ford for that one. Also, as you can probably tell, there's no manual mode. I think I said that already, but just to be sure. And here you have a 100% manual parking brake, which I always love to see. Let's move on to the gauge cluster screen. This thing measures 12.8 inches in diameter, which is not the usual sort of size we see from gauge cluster screens like this. Usually they're 10.25 inches or 12.3, but rarely 12.8. They're very clear and very easy to read, and I like the graphics as well. They're pleasing. On the left, you have your tachometer, standard stuff. On the right, you have the speedometer, your fuel gauge down there, as well as how much you have left with this tank. That's your overall odometer. Your trip computer 1 is here. You can configure this. I'll show you. That's the auto start stop, the lane keep assist, and the coolant temperature. And you also have a compass here, which is nice. You control what's shown in the middle of the screen through this array here. So the OK button, the up and down, the back, and this menu button here. So if I were to push down like this, you'll see the rest of the displays that the trip computer can show you. So if you press the back button, it gets rid of the trip computer, and you can just have this calm screen with the little Puma in the middle. Standard stuff, really. We've seen this a million times before. If you press this button, it brings up the overall menu where you can choose what you want to look at. You also have your navigation here and your settings. There's something fun you can do with the settings. I'll show you in a moment. You have some navigation shortcuts here, but there's no navigation. It can't show you the map in the screen. You have to look over here. And in my view, you can configure what exactly you want to be seeing at any given moment, which is a nice feature. But I just keep it on the trip and fuel data because that's the thing I'm used to. And if you're on the main screen like this and you push down here, you also have a comm screen with no dials. So you just have your range. Stop getting confused. You have your range and your speed, and that's about it for that one. Now I'm going to show you the fun thing you can do. So first thing you need to do, I mentioned this on Twitter, you can make the gauge cluster kind of resemble Need for Speed The Run's heads-up display. So let's do that now. You go into Features, and then you go into Drive Modes, and you select Eco. Then you go in the screen, you access your menu again. If you press OK, by the way, on this empty screen, the last thing you had on there will pop back up again. But anyway, you go into Settings, you go into Theme Selection, and then you change to Copper. And now, as you can see, we have something that resembles Need for Speed The Run's HUD. That green indicator in the speedometer, which tells us that we're in eco mode, looks like the nitrous gauge, and the rest is all gray and orange, like Need for Speed The Run's heads-up display. This was obviously not intentional, but it's still fun. Okay, now that we're done with that bullshit, let's move on to the other stuff in the interior. Here lies... That sounds like it's dead. No. In the center, we have Sync 4 on a 13-inch screen. Previously, the Puma's infotainment system was plonked on top of the dashboard. It shared its interior with the Fiesta. But now the screen has been moved here in the center where it's much easier to access. And it's also way bigger. However, the physical climate controls have been sacrificed. The previous pre-facelift Puma did have physical AC controls. This one does not. But your AC controls are always pinned here at the bottom. Your fan speed, air conditioning, rear defrost, max front defrost, which doesn't need to be there because you have that button right there. Your zones, your automatic, recirculating air, and your temperatures. As for Sync 4 itself, well, it's pretty good. It's fairly responsive. The animations are not exactly the smoothest, but it's fairly responsive. Apple CarPlay can be used wirelessly, but I use a cable for reasons that I've explained, so it doesn't mess up my microphones. And you can access all sorts of options from here. And one thing I love about the built-in navigation system is that it shows you landmarks in 3D, which is always nice to have. You can also download additional apps according to this. And one thing that I don't like about Sync 4 is that the drive modes and the driver assistance systems have to be accessed through here. I would much prefer a physical switch, especially for the drive modes, but we can't have that, unfortunately. This is all your driver assistance systems, which are also controlled through the infotainment system, but I'm glad that they're all a list that's very easy to understand. And overall, Sync 4 is a pretty good infotainment system. This is my first time using it, and I like it. I like the resolution of the screen is great. I like the graphics. It's all very easy to read and fairly easy to understand. And Apple CarPlay works a treat as well. So, good job on Sync 4. Down here, not much. You have your volume control and power button, which is a dial. I'm grateful for that one. You have your start, stop, enable, and disable. We'll get to the start, stop later because it's not quite as simple as it seems. This option, which annoys me to no end, it's your parking camera button, but if you press it, as you can see, you get two options. So you have to tap on the screen to get to the cameras. And this is especially a problem because, well, I'll just demonstrate it to you. So say you put the car in reverse and you're parking, but then you have to maneuver, so you have to put it back in drive. Watch what happens when I put it in drive. It doesn't assume that you're maneuvering, it just turns the cameras off, so then you have to go in here and then tap on the screen to bring the cameras back up again. Not the best integration, if I'm honest with you, but again, as I said before, it's good that this car has them to begin with. Max defrost is here. Over here you have your wireless charging pad for your phone with a nice little cutout if you want to use a cable regardless of wireless charging or not, which I do. You get a choice between USB-C and USB-A, always a welcome addition. And in terms of the interior and features, that's about it. Here's your turn signal stock and wiper stock. Yeah, by the way, that's another confusing thing. So the turn signals and wipers are on the same stock, but the shifter's in the center console, so there's nothing here. It's empty. Is this another cost-cutting measure? I'm not sure. Over here is your light switch. Works in the normal way, nothing crazy about that. Your headlight leveling switch. Power mirrors, power locks, and power windows. All four of them are automatic but in both directions. This is power folding mirrors. which are tied to the door locks as you saw, and your door handle. That's really about it for interior content and features. Let's end this off in the normal way. Let's talk about interior quality and storage. Well, in terms of quality, it's okay. It's pretty good. Like, it's obvious that this is Ford's cheapest model. I mean, there's hard plastic here on the top of the door, but then there's some padded leather here in the middle. And thank goodness the armrest is also padded. Most of the dashboard here is fairly hard, scratchy plastic. There's some cloth here, which I don't really know why, but you do have some cloth in there. There's a little bit of padded leather that you already saw on the dash. So it's not that it's a bad place to be, it's just that it's clear that this is Ford's cheapest model and some things had to be cut. But in terms of assembly quality, it's actually fairly solid. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart, and the screens don't creak all that much. Like, maybe initially when you tug on them like that, they will creak, but then when you move them around and flex them, they don't creak at all, which is great. So overall, the interior quality on the Puma is solid. However, if you're removing your USB cable from this panel, be careful, because if you tug on it too hard, you might completely tear this panel off, as I almost learned the hard way. As for storage, well, you have some pretty sizable door pockets here, although as I said in my tweet, I'm not exactly sure how they're supposed to be divided. I'm not sure what's going on here, but they do fit a large bottle, as I tried myself. You have your wireless charger phone storage area and some miscellaneous small cubby here, maybe for some coins or what have you. You have two cup holders, including one tiny one in the middle. I haven't found a use for it, but you do have that. Another coin storage below the parking brake. Another little cubby here with little ridges at the bottom. And autofocus is really not feeling it today. Little cubby there. A sizable center console that includes a separate shelf that you can remove. There's my microfiber cloth that I use to clean the screens, and my cable there at the bottom. And you don't have to remove it necessarily, you can just lift it out of the way to get to whatever's on the bottom. Also, good on Ford for including an armrest in a vehicle from this segment. And finally, the glove box, which is sizable. There's plenty of storage in there. So overall, the Puma's interior is a good place to be. Good job. Finally, the powertrain. So the Puma's powertrain lineup in Macedonia, and I assume the rest of the world as well, has been scaled down dramatically. There's now only one, and it's this one, the 1-liter EcoBoost Turbo 3-cylinder with mild hybrid technology. This is the award-winning 1-liter EcoBoost 3-cylinder that Ford's been putting on its cars for about a decade now. In the Puma, it has 125 horsepower, 0 to 100 kph is around 9.5 seconds, while the top speed is almost 200 kph, actually 196 kph, which works out to about 122 miles an hour. So what is it actually like? Well, let's find out together. It's time to take the Puma for a drive. So let's have a look at what the Puma is like on the road, starting with town driving and the mild hybrid system. You might have heard that the mild hybrid system does not replace the starter motor. This is the most basic form of such a system, in that when you get to a certain speed while slowing down, about 10 kilometers an hour on your way to 0, the engine cuts off and the mild hybrid system fills in for it. Obviously, this is good for fuel consumption, and the Puma, depending on how you drive it, the fuel economy varies quite a bit, but I was able to get about 7 liters per 100 kilometers of driving in the city and about 5.5 on the highway, which is fantastic. It converts to about this many mpgs. Other than, the engine cutting off when you're slowing down, there's not really a whole lot of difference to driving a normal gas-powered car. At normal speeds, the engine is running all the time, and it's very docile and quiet in the city. You can't really tell it's a 3-cylinder at lower speeds. The city is, after all, the Puma's home environment. Let's be real, it's a B-segment SUV, and it does great here. The ride is pretty comfortable, at least with these 17-inch wheels. I'm not sure what it is on the larger wheels. It's comfortable, the seats are decently supportive. I would like a little bit more bolstering, but they are solid. The fact that it's an automatic makes things easier. The steering is very lightweight. In eco mode it is anyway, we'll come back to that. And driving the Puma in the city is a very pleasant experience altogether. As for the highway, well, I was pleasantly surprised on the highway. Usually, when you have something that is the cheapest car that the automaker offers, or is indeed a crossover,
and in this case it's both, I don't always expect the best sound insulation. And because of the aerodynamic properties, I also expect wind noise and tire noise and things like that at highway speeds. But that was not the case with the Puma. There was basically no wind noise at all. There was a little bit of road noise, but as I've said before, I attribute that to Macedonia's hideous roads rather than the car itself and its sound insulation, or the tires for that matter. The Puma, in this case, did have some solid tires on it, but hardly any wind noise at all on the highway. And of course, there's plenty of power to overtake cars. You have a sport mode for the transmission if you need to do that. And on the highway, it's a much better experience than a small and something that is labeled the cheapest car in the automaker's lineup would have you to believe. The biggest surprise with the Puma is its driving dynamics when you take it out on twisty roads. Ford is known for this sort of thing, at least in Europe they are. Every single Ford model, at least for the past 20 years or so, has been fun to drive no matter which spec it's in. And that was certainly the case with the Puma. When you put it in sport mode, obviously the transmission holds the revs a little bit higher. The steering weights up a little bit, but not artificially so, which is great. There's hardly any body roll in the corners. The engine makes a fun little 3-cylinder noise, which I always enjoy. And yeah, the Puma puts a surprisingly big smile on your face while you're on twisty roads relative to what it is. I don't really have a lot to say in terms of complaints about the Puma's driving experience. It was pretty solid in just about every environment. Again, I would prefer slightly more supportive seats, and I would also like an auto hold system because it doesn't have one. And also the fact that the mild hybrid system, while that's theoretically how it's supposed to work, didn't always do that. Like, more often than not, I would pull up to a stoplight or whatever, and the engine would just stay on, even with the air conditioning turned off. So that's really the only minor complaints I have with the drive on the Puma. The rest was all excellent. So, that's the Ford Puma. It's a classic case in point that just because something is the cheapest car in the brand's lineup doesn't mean it's bad. The Puma, it's a very good little crossover. If you are in the market for a B SUV, this is definitely an option that you might want to consider. And for my American viewers, I do apologize that you all don't get this over there, because you are kind of missing out. It would be a fantastic competitor to the Nissan Kicks that you have over there. The Ford Puma gets a score of 8 out of 10. Thank you everyone for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check on the community tab for upcoming videos, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.